Hi everyone, thank you for coming to my presentation. I'm very grateful for this opportunity and I'm very excited to show you my research. So my name is Chloe Russell, I'm an artist/science communicator and I'm just finishing my Masters in Science Communication here in Bristol. And for my final research project, I asked the question, how can we use sonification to create connections to the environment? And this is a creative practice as study project, which means I've created something and then I've evaluated how the public responded to it. And here I present to you Kalerrâ. I'm really excited to share this with you today. Kalerrâ was inspired by an expedition I went on 2 years ago to eastern Greenland to measure climate change and oceanic plastic pollution. Now, Kalerrâ is a nature documentary podcast that uses dialogue from the artists and scientists from the expedition, soundscapes I recorded on the expedition, and original written music. The expedition was led by PhD student Anne Lydia Wainwright, who was photo-documenting the glaciers and comparing them to images taken 80 years ago. That way she could measure how climate change had impacted in this environment. We also had marine biologists with us, and they brought a manta trawl to measure the plastic that they were seeing in the water. I've included this interactive map that one of our marine biologists has made, and each tag represents a moment where a photograph has been taken and its geotagging metadata has been inputted into the map. So you can see the days are on the top right, which I'm clicking over here, and each day represents a day in the expedition. In this slide we see the voices within Kalerrâ, including Amy Pryor, Wanda Bodner, Anne Lydia, Laura Williams, and myself, Chloe Russell. Now, I'd like to share with you a short soundbite of the first episode in Kalerrâ. I hope you enjoy that.
It was nothing, yet sort of everything. The silence, the peace, the closeness of nature wasn't like that before when I was offshore. So this was definitely something else. Everything just got filtered out through this whiteness and blueness and nature, and then a lot of the things, they were just left behind.
So now we have the background of Kalerrâ in check, let's revisit the research question. Now, we've all seen nature documentaries on television. They've inspired many generations to pursue their interest in the natural world and beyond. But how does this translate through audio? Would people be interested in listening to the natural world? Does taking the visual away defeat the purpose of entertainment education? Could audio alone inspire people as it does through watching documentaries? So first things first, delving into previous research and deconstructing the elements within this main research question. Podcasts. Who here listens to podcasts? I'll pretend like I can see a glorious amount of hands up right now. So podcasts are a great resource in science communication. They offer a two-way dialogue through facilities like social media and website comment sections. They also offer flexibility. Listeners are given control of what they listen to and when they want to. And lastly, science podcasts have become a varied and abundant avenue for science communication. They cover many different topics, audiences, and formats. Next, we look at sight art. So art often communicates below the level of consciousness and has a unique capacity to shape and connect our understandings, values, and emotions, and motivate us to change our behaviours in response. We can use art as a way of communicating complicated sciences. And I'd like to pull out an example of ocean literacy meets science communication, which some of you may be familiar with. It's called Project Zero at Carnaby Street. The iconic Carnaby Street in London transformed into this theatrical underwater scene representing areas of the ocean that needed conservation. Next, we're going to look at sonification. So sonification is the use of non-speech audio to convey information and meaning. And there are two subcategories of sonification which will be adopted in this practice. Firstly, auditorial icons, which are basically oral metaphors. They create a natural connection between the data and the sound, and this is where the sound is intuitive to listeners. Secondly, we use musification. This can be defined as the musical representation of data, and applying a set of musical constraints to data offers the listeners to engage and analyse the music, a process which listeners do automatically and intuitively. And lastly, another useful tool in science communication is narrative. A narrative offers connection and familiarity and helps us make sense of the world. It can create a link between science and society through simple, clear messages. And people can often follow complicated narratives naturally, which is a great source for science communication. Overall, the responses from listening to Kalerrâ was positive. Participants expressed they felt calm after listening to the music, concerned after listening to the science, and immersed from the soundscapes and the stories. So to achieve these results, there were 3 types of evaluation methods to use. Firstly, a pilot activity was used to compare how 2 groups of participants responded to, firstly, an audio-visual preview of Kalerrâ, and secondly, an audio-only preview of Kalerrâ. And these results helped develop the making of the full podcast. The next 2 stages involved distributing a new survey alongside the release of Kalerrâ, and collecting metadata from listeners outside the survey was also taken. So the pilot activity participants who listened to the preview found it more immersive than watching it. They also preferred the dialogue more than the music, or even a combination of them both. And this could suggest that participants who are listening only are more engaged with the storytelling and the science. And finally, both groups found listening to have a calming effect. Next, we look at the main survey, which received a total of 46 participants. The majority of them found it pleasant, immersive, and much like the audio-only group from the pilot activity, they preferred the dialogue. Next, we look at the statistics from Spotify. Looking at these statistics help us understand which publics are engaging with the podcast and how their demographic characteristics affect this, which is useful to integrate data with the main survey response. The Spotify platform was chosen to represent the listeners' statistics, as this was the most used podcast platform for Kalerrâ. In these next slides, we look at the discussion from the study. There are 4 tools for answering the main research question. First, we look at the use of emotion. Survey participants mostly described feeling calm, concerned, and connected. The most popular feeling was calm, which I'd like to go back to later in this presentation. You might have noticed earlier that 70% of survey participants felt listening was a pleasant experience, which contradicts feelings of concern. However, one participant explains why this could be, and they say, "It is difficult to talk about emotional response to Kalerrâ without reflecting on the environmental issues." And that was in a way juxtaposed against the serenity of the soundscape. And finally, we have participants expressing they feel connected. And this was a great result for the main research question of how we can create connections to the environment. As Kalerrâ has immersed people into the Greenlandic environment, they are therefore connected into nature. So let's take a deeper look into this use of immersion. The majority of participants found Kalerrâ immersive. This result builds on existing research of transportation narratives, a type of immersion which occurs when a listener becomes fully absorbed in their narrative world. Transportation narratives also become influential if they are enjoyed, which this study supports, as 70% of participants agreed listening was a pleasant experience. And female survey participants found Kalerrâ to be more immersive, but it doesn't end there. They actually found it to be more pleasant and informative. And this would also explain why there are more female listeners on Spotify. Next, we move on to aesthetics. Participants expressed their love of the music in Kalerrâ and found that the use of music, soundscapes and sound design helped them focus on the storytelling and the science. The simple, that is, the beautiful, brings understanding more readily. Without the attractive music and thoughtfully placed soundscapes, we risk the science not being absorbed by listeners. Next, we move on to our final discussion point, which is the use of imagination. The following result was a positive surprise and was drawn from the pilot activity survey. I asked participants to describe what mental images they were imagining whilst listening, and then I inputted their answers into a word cloud, and these were the results. Word clouds work by making the most used word the biggest, so in this instance water, blue, and landscape were used most often. Thinking linearly, yes, participants are correct in describing the environment of the expedition of Greenland, but what does thinking of water and blue do to our brains? Exposure to blue light has been shown to produce physical, cognitive, and emotional benefits. Due to its specific wavelength, the colour blue is known to exert a calming, relaxing, yet energising effect, and thus simulate a positive emotional response. And this research correlates and supports the results of this study that participants are painting blue water environments in their mind, which evokes feelings of calmness, pleasantness, and positivity. And you could also suggest that thinking blue stimulates sadness, which some of these participants did feel. So, to summarise, we've looked at how the use of emotion, immersion, aesthetics, and imagination can be a useful tool in future practices like this. By combining all of these elements, we can further pursue similar practices like this by successfully connecting people to the environment through sonification. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my research and learning about Kalerrâ. To listen, you can find it on all popular podcast platforms. And keep an eye out, or I should say keep an ear out for new projects under Kalerrâ. And if you're interested in being involved with our future projects, then please do get in touch. Thank you, and I am ready to answer any of your questions.
Hello everyone, my name is Charline Guillou. I'm at the University of Brest, Communication Officer for the Ocean University Initiative, promoting the establishment of a United Nations University Institute dedicated to the ocean and coast in Brest. The initiative works at the policy science interface in the area of international policies for climate, biodiversity, and ocean. The Blue Diplomacy project is part of this initiative. As you may have read in the abstract, our action takes place in the context of the ongoing negotiations at the UN for an ambitious treaty on the conservation and sustainable use of marine biodiversity of areas beyond national jurisdiction, within the framework of the UNCLOS. The Blue Diplomacy project aims to support the implementation of this ambitious treaty by providing tools for training and knowledge mediation about conservation stakes and ocean governance in the high seas. We assume that the quality of this treaty will depend on the understanding of the issues by the many actors concerned by it. For example, mediators, administrators, journalists, all stakeholders. The idea is not only to train but also to educate and raise awareness on these issues. With or without an agreement, the issue of governance on the high seas will in the future mobilize more and more actors, all in demand for support. In view of the complexity of the profiles and subjects, we were convinced that in order to develop learning communication, we have to use more participatory techniques that engage the target groups. We first refer to the now well-known concept of ocean literacy, with the idea that the purpose is for the intended audience, whatever their level of position, to better understand its impacts on the ocean and capture its dependence on the ocean. As a first step, we had to think about how to create links between the scientists and policy officers and all stakeholders who will implement the future treaty in each of their country and region. Mediation must be about create links and the transfer of knowledge through two-ways exchange and practice. It's not only a question of transmitting content, but also of sharing expertise, the ambitions of means of research, as well as the true nature of the problem to be addressed. It aims to open up citizens and intended audience to questioning, to learning to question oneself, to work on one's critical spirit, to give the desire to learn by oneself in order to empower people. This is how the idea of developing a serious game popped up. I'm going to share with you now the steps we have put in place to produce a serious game. So let's move to the overall design and production of Blue Diplomacy. Here are a few quotes about serious games. A game may have a serious objective. Freud said, "The opposite of play is not what is serious, but what is real." According to Matthew Ashley, most effective tools to change behavior require groups to engage with the tool for more than a few minutes. Then, according to Gilles Bruguère, specialized in game science and educational science, play decide. Play is about making decisions. In general, you're not passive when you play. In our case, we had to build a game that would encourage and guarantee participation. Serious games are now part of the palette of educational tools. They are used in professional training as well as in school education. For Wolters and Lahl, in a meta-analysis on the pedagogical use of serious games and on players' motivation, shows that teaching with serious games generates higher learning gains than traditional teaching. The authors talk about situational and contextual factors that enable better learning through serious games. They consider that students who play serious games in group learn more than those who play them individually. The interests of serious games are many. The players can experience result risk, it's not reality. You can play a role in the negotiation arena. You can convey information, exchange knowledge, and represent complex dynamics. You can deal with the constrained time of the audience, and you can increase the benefits with a debriefing session, often as important as the game itself. So the first part of the methodology, I would say it's getting informed. For us, the initial question was how to build a game that is entertaining but also serious with an educational purpose. The method we used was meeting the practitioners of participatory simulation and serious gaming. Naturally, we also looked for books and resource persons of educational power of games in school, university, professional training. Then we had to create a team. So the next step is surrounding oneself. The initial question was how to start the creation process without experience in serious game and in the topic. The method we used was multidisciplinary team network building. We decided to collaborate with professionals in scientific mediation and professionals in pedagogical support, collaborate with game designers, and of course scientists and practitioners of the topic. In our case, we have much benefit to work with one student from an art school and one game designer who is also a political scientist specialist. In order to ensure the relevance of the game's content, we set up a multidisciplinary scientific board. Which brings me to the next point, the iteration, where we were also accompanied by professionals in the creation of educational materials. Up to this stage, it's more to get people brain time than financial resources. The third part, it iterated frame. The initial question was how to make all of this collaborative intelligence work together. So we decided to use the design thinking workshops to move from an idea to reality. So we went through different insights, open dialogues, the idea is to listen and learn, generate ideas to find solutions and to create new opportunities in order to get visions about the frame of the game. In our case, we participated in some workshops to learn, and we organized 2 workshops to frame the game. We got in touch with education professionals who lead this type of workshops. They make possible to obtain concrete results at the end of a meeting, such as action plans or prototypes. I think design thinking is really a strength to federate the members of a team and facilitates collective adhesion to the project. The next step is co-design. How to translate the outcome of the design thinking into game mechanics. With co-design workshops, we were able to set up an action plan and assessment methodology. We identified needs for knowledge, like nature and society. We designed game action logic to keep the game entertaining and serious. And we used conceptual modeling and prototyping. After that, it's time to test. It's where we are now in this Blue Diplomacy project. How to ensure that the game works and the content is relevant and understandable to all. We will organize some test sessions at different scales. First locally, and we also want to involve people not aware of the topic. We'll try to measure the actions and to give a survey after games. Then we'll modify and adjust the mechanics and communicate the results to the team. Once everything is done, how to bring our game to as many people as possible, how to disseminate it. We'll do some communication campaigns targeted through some sectors like policy, administration, industry, NGOs. We'll work on an attractive website with a nice storytelling. We'll give access to downloadable resources that will be well documented, open source, easy access, like a print and play version of the board game. We will document a wiki how to make the board game. We are also considering the development of a digital version of the game once the board game is finished. And of course, organize some game sessions. The last step we identify is the evolution and update of the game through the question how to ensure the durability of the game and how to take advantage of the richness of the gameplay. We decided to work on the business model to offer training on how to use the game, to create the forum on the website to reference and document the games played, to provide documentation for assessments and feedbacks, to communicate widely the results, and to keep on co-designing. In addition, we'd like the co-creation process to continue as we want to collect the players' opinion beyond the end-game debriefing with a survey and leave the possibility for the more experienced players to invent their cards. In conclusion, I would like to say, for this kind of project, we must be careful to not skip any steps. We must accept this long time that is necessary and in which, in my opinion, will condition the success of such a project. It's also necessary to look for expertise where it can be found, because the task can quickly appear huge and unsurmountable when the objectives are defined and the ambition expressed. We must make this collective intelligence that surrounds us work. We are all actors of solutions. On our side, we are considering the creation of a MOOC, massive open source online course, and a resource repository for those who want to go further. Anyway, I hope that the result of Blue Diplomacy will live up to our expectations and those we are addressing. Thanks for your attention.
Within your own capacity?
We'll look for testers. First, we'll test with our closest colleagues in Brest. And then we hope we'll be able to organize a bigger test stations with people interested by the game, but yeah, we don't know if we'll be able to invite some people. So I will let you know. I will inform people on the social media and on our website. So I don't know yet, but finger crossed.
Okay, thank you very much. And the last question I have here is from Angel. What was the most interesting thing you learned working with game developers? Was there something super extra that you learned during the process that you'd like to share with us?
I learned a lot of things. Yeah, they have different vision, and we are concentrate for our side. We are concentrating on the content, the scientific content, and they are trying to keep the game fun. So they show us a lot of examples, different games. So
It was also a fun process.
Yeah, really, really. Yeah, we've got many people around the table with different professions, so it's so interesting.
Okay.
And yeah, for mechanical process, it's really interesting to test and talk with everybody, especially with the game designers.
Okay. All right, thank you very much. And now we are approaching the third presentation by Rebecca Lahl. And this is going to be about designing and disseminating effective policy briefs. So Rebecca, the floor is yours. Let's enjoy your presentation.
Thank you. You're able to see my presentation now, right?
Yes.
Perfect. So I'm going to talk about policy briefs as a communication tool in marine sciences today. I want to introduce you to the ZMT policy brief series, provide a little bit of guidance on how to write a policy brief, about principles, the structure, style, and dissemination, and also talk about monitoring impact. So my name is Rebecca Lahl, and I work at the Leibniz Center for Tropical Marine Research in Bremen, Germany. And I'm heading the Office for Knowledge Exchange, which is a supporting unit at our institute that supports transdisciplinarity, stakeholder engagement, knowledge exchange, tech transfer, and capacity development with stakeholders outside academia, with policy actors, industry, and civil society. So we do understand knowledge exchange as a two-way street. It's at one point, it's science communication to stakeholders, but also the integration of interests and knowledge of stakeholders into our work. But what's a policy brief? It's a very concise document of 2 to 4 pages that sums up research and gives a policy recommendation in 6 bullet points, so to say. The ZMT policy brief series that you can find online, below is the link, is the example that I want to talk about today. We try to publish 5 policy briefs annually, and they are 4 pages long. They illustrate the high practical and political relevance of our research. They include key findings of our research and provide recommendation for environmental policy and sustainable development. So I am editing this series. I have a background as a policy advisor. I've worked as a policy advisor for German Development Cooperation. And I'm drafting together with the scientists the text, and I help with layout and the dissemination. if you ask yourself why you should write a policy brief, I can give you a couple of good reasons. If you are a scientist, a policy brief helps to make the research effective for society and for policy. So it will close knowledge gaps, and it makes research visible and also underlines the value of research. In the process, you will, I think, become a better communicator, and which in turn qualifies for work outside academia. Benefits to decision makers are what we aim for: a higher capacity to make decisions, more informed decisions, that you can implement relevant and realistic solutions to policy problems, and that your decisions are evidence-based. How to write a policy brief. Usually our scientist will send me a first draft for an idea of a policy brief, and I usually go through it, and these are the 3 questions that I will ask. Who's the audience for your policy brief? And this is this is quite important to define who the audience is, and also what is the central message, what is the central ask, what is what you want the policymaker to do. And always I ask, why is this particular information or the results that you explain in the policy brief relevant for the policy issue? Talking about the target audience, they are decision makers. But what are decision makers? Decision makers is a large group of different actors. So there may be politicians or elected officials. So they might work in ministries, but also policy analysts or development practitioners. Donors might implement your recommendation in the next funding schemes. Ecosystem users, managers, or community leaders are also decision makers, for example, in a community-led management of a marine protected area, for example. So you would need to ask yourself who will implement the ask or the action that you ask for, or who may broker your message. I have to say that ZMT is a German institute that works in the tropics. So for us, it is quite a challenge to connect and also identify the target audience sometimes. So my primary advice would be to cooperate with partners and experts from the country you are working in. So how could you identify the target audience, the decision makers? You could simply ask your partners that you work with, or your colleagues, on who the relevant decision makers are and how to approach them. Also can be helpful to simply look for the target audience on social media, on ResearchGate, LinkedIn, or Facebook. To connect to the audience, I also would support a policy brief that is co-authored by not only, for example, German scientists, but also in collaboration with scientists from abroad. I think it gains more visibility and is also more legitimate. Connecting to the audience is also important to ask who may help you to disseminate. For example, is there an environmental NGO that works along this interest, or could press be something to involve? We also translate our policy briefs into the national or local language. So have it in English and also, for example, Bahasa Indonesia. Coming to the key message, I think is the most important part. It needs to be based on the scientific findings, but it can also kind of synthesize different findings from different publications and be kind of merged with your expert opinion. It helps to define the key message and write it on top of your computer and look at it, and you can also kind of reoccur in the policy brief in a rephrased manner. I wanted to give you an example of a key message and also an example on how we disseminate through social media. I would prepare a social media post like this, with a picture that has relevant information in it. So the title of the policy brief and a link to the download, also some information what the policy brief is about. There's also a picture of the authors and the name, and in the right top corner is the key message here. It would say there's a need for better integration and assessment of fisheries and irrigation schemes to augment the benefits from reservoirs. If you're interested to learn more about Policy Brief, we also have an info sheet online at the ZMT website on principles on how to write a policy brief. Coming to the structural elements of our policy brief, we do have a title, of course, and an executive summary on the first page, a blue box that also highlights in a short way the key results and recommendations. What is different of these structural elements to other publications are especially the context. So the context wouldn't describe research methods in details, but rather has information on the social, environmental, or practical problem that you address, also the political or legal relevance. And it kind of convinces and leads the reader it convinces that the issue needs attention. Other very important element, of course, are the policy recommendations. So an effective policy brief must propose solutions to a well-defined problem that can be addressed at the level of policy. And this may sound quite easy, but it can take a lot of work to think of a problem in that way. So I would also recommend, in terms of style guide, to write the text rather active and colloquial and break it up into shorter paragraphs. I always, if I'm not sure if a layperson can understand it, I would give it to my husband and ask him if he can understand that sentence, which is often quite helpful. I would include strong, meaningful, relevant, and simple figures, and also use colors boxes and bold text. There are a couple of challenges during the writing process in terms of different expectations. Will you change the world with your policy brief? That's not likely. Will you shape discourses? Maybe. It may be that that you work for the bin, so to say, which is often happens in political consulting, for example. It's difficult to find the so-called windows of opportunities. So it helps to strategize, are there any upcoming events where you could table the policy brief? Or I would also recommend not to send out the policy brief on Friday afternoons because no one will read it. It's also a challenge on, to give policy recommendations if you lack knowledge of the policy process and also on governance. So it might be necessary to research a little bit about that. It can be that you have conflicting results or conflicting advice, and that's really difficult to include in a 4-page document. It may be that, of course, a policy brief can have negative outcomes. So it's important to think about what negative outcomes could be. Challenges also to monitor impact. And I would also recommend, if you're planning to write a policy brief, to be very aware of the political sensitivity of the subject you're talking about. And if you have a public relation office, they might help you in with a couple of questions. How do we monitor impact? It's always a difficult subject, but I wanted to give an example of a policy brief about shrimp aquaculture in Indonesia. There was an internal seminar, and the policy brief was tabled to the Indonesian embassy in Berlin. And they received it, and after that they sent an official letter to several Indonesian ministers to inform about possible improvements in shrimp aquaculture. Based on the study that has been done at our institute. We know of one aquaculture facility that applies these recommendations. We found out through Facebook. There was also a conflict that was being resolved between a local NGO that engages for mangrove protection and aquaculture facilities. yeah, that was resolved within the time frame of the policy brief, but we are not know exactly if we had some impact on that. So we do not have monitor impact through key performance indicators, such as the number of downloads. We do collect feedback from readers. We also assess or try to assess the follow-up activities. For example, here you can see Justian, who was the author of the policy brief, meeting the Indonesian ambassador in Berlin. Of course, the policy brief was not the main reason that they met, but I think it's always kind of a melange of things, and it might be one reason. We also try to find a master's student that looked into the impact of our ZMT policy brief series. Yeah, I'm still looking for one. If you're interested, let me know. If you're interested in impact, I also like to highlight our impact assessment brochure, where we look at our impact of our work beyond research projects. Yeah, it's more on a higher level, long-term perspective, and it has this narrative approach of looking into our impact. So I hope I'm within the time and that you found my talk interesting, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. It was very interesting for me, especially I'm personally involved in the preparation of the World Ocean Assessment at the United Nations, and we had that to deal with the policy brief at some point. It was the most painful part of the meeting at some point, because at the end of the day we had no clue basically how to do it. So it's good to have good examples, definitely. Okay, so are these policy briefs also requested by decision makers? How do you get feedback from the people receiving it? Could you please comment on that?
I can't really say if they are requested. We haven't had yet the case that this has been particularly requested. We do get feedback by mail. I always am asking my colleagues to send me if they get some feedbacks through mail. And yeah, as mentioned before, it would be really nice to have, for example, a master student or someone else to look into the impact and maybe have some interviews with decision makers. But that's currently beyond my capacities to do that.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any other questions in the chat room? I don't see any other questions. So you said that you're not sure if they're required, but I think maybe if they're the policy briefs, even if they're not required, but I do have a feeling they may be expected anyway, right? So
I guess so, or the donors kind of expect them also. Right. And of course, what we try to apply a co-design approach, a true transdisciplinary approach to our research, which is why we would like to involve decision makers early on in our research, and also, yeah, kind of grasp what their knowledge needs are right from the beginning. So the policy brief, of course, is a kind of, yeah, it's a science communication instrument, but we try to engage with policymakers early on.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. The next question is, what are your most common ways to disseminate these policy briefs?
So in the past, we have printed them and also sent them out by airmail to relevant ministries and agencies or other researchers also, or networks. I think due to the Corona pandemic, much has changed, and I'm also focusing more on online distribution now. So I would actually look up potential recipients through social media channels. I would look who's working at the Fisheries Commission in Ghana through LinkedIn, and would collect these, collect the audience and try to contact them if possible. And yeah, send out emails mostly, and put the policy brief also online on Facebook and LinkedIn. Yeah, and also we do have the case. It's also, I try to discuss that with the scientists that know the country better than I do usually, what the most appropriate ways could be. So for example, we had a policy brief in Brazil, and the authors mentioned that there were WhatsApp groups where they share this kind of information. So we also distributed through WhatsApp groups.
Well, my experience from the other side, again, from not the person who sends the policy briefs, but again, back to the UN, it's the UN ambassadors of different countries and their press officers are quite a effective source of passing the information if you have good contacts, right? So, but maybe the embassy of the particular country could be also a useful place.
Yeah, we definitely send them out to the German embassy in the country abroad. What I forgot to mention is that we do have a very large alumni network of over 700 alumni from ZMT from pretty much all over the world, I think about over 60 countries. So they are quite active in this alumni network, and I would also contact them if they're from the country. Some of the alumni are even ambassadors, so we usually connect to them if we are interested in discussing things or networking. So that is also a very important channel.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have a question to Charline now. How would you evaluate the impact of the game you are developing? Charline, could you please comment on evaluation of the impact of the game?
Yeah, we will have some observators for the games, because first we will train those who are autistic but the game. We'll train the how do you call it? Mediator of the game, the
facilitator.
Facilitator.
Yeah, kind of facilitator. You know, when you play the role gaming, there is
it's a master, yeah.
The
master of like the game. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not good. I'm not good in board games, so I'm not much of a help.
So yeah, we will train, and then we'll prepare a survey as well. So
okay,
the observation and the survey will be able to evaluate the impact, and then we also see where it goes and which countries, and we'll create a forum on the website, and we'll ask the people who play to document their games.
Mm-hmm. So there are some possibilities to you allow the idea that maybe you'll have to make some changes due to the for example a large number of comments of the same type, right?
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Would someone else like to ask the question? We're just about to close the session, so that would be the last chance, pretty much. If not, then I would really like to thank Charline and Rebecca, and of course Chloe, who is not with us, but provided us with a very nice video. Thank you very much. And we are approaching a short break, and then we'll have the final session at 3:30, and hope to see you all there. And take a short rest from the computers, and let's see each other. And oh no, I'm sorry, we have workshops. I'm very sorry. We have to go to workshop sessions now. Okay.
Thanks for
I
having
skipped
us.
the workshop part. Sorry, my fault. Okay, so enjoy the workshops and then the break. Okay, bye-bye.
I will just share my screen with the contacts from Chloe because some people
Thank you very much.
ask for it, and I think it's more GDPR friendly if we do it this way. You know, it's information she shared, so we'll just leave it here for a couple of minutes if somebody would like to note down and contact her.
Sure. Thank you very much.